Hello friends, welcome to a beginner's classroom. In this video, we are going to see on what is JSX and how it's being helpful in React. Let's start with some theoretical view on this and later we will see it practically. Actually, JSX stands for JavaScript XML. JSX is an XML or HTML-like syntax that can be used in React. And this extends the ECMAScript which help us to write HTML kind of syntax in JavaScript file itself. During the compilation time, this syntax will be processed through transpilers like Babel to transform it into standard JavaScript object. Here, you should be aware that it's not compulsory to use JSX in React, it's an optional. But React communities is always considering this as an easy approach and a better way to define our markups. Now let's see why we are using JSX and what are the benefits of this. It allows us to have the HTML code in the JavaScript file itself so that we can tightly couple the template and display logics. Since we are having HTML code in JavaScript, we can utilize the full power of JavaScript features while building our templates. Through this, we can avoid learning and using a separate template language. Also, if you want to make any changes in our logic, we can just modify in a single file instead of searching for its dependencies in other separate files. This will make our code maintenance easier, especially in big project structure. Now, let's explain you pictorially on what's the major difference on having a template and model in a separate file rather than in a single file using JSX. First, let's consider that we have a separate template file which we can usually see in other frameworks like Angular. Here you can see we are writing our normal HTML code in a separate file and our other business logics in a separate JS file, which is nothing but our component class. So all the objects or variable has to be explicitly bind from our component to template file. Also in the same way, if there any event triggered from the user, then that change also to be binded from this template file to the corresponding object in the component file. Here you can notice that we are having the different file for each component. So whenever we are making any changes in the component, then we have to search for its dependent file and make the changes in that file too. For a smaller project, it may looks fine. But whenever our project structure is going bigger, then we may face some difficulty in managing it. Now, if you look on the React approach using JSX, there won't be any separate template file. Rather, we will embed the HTML code in the component file itself using this JSX syntax. So here we no need of separate template file and also there won't be any explicit binding logic to bind the values with the template file. Also for any change in the logic, we can just do it in a single file rather than searching for its dependent file and updating in that file too. Now, you might have convinced that this approach is better in comparing with separate template logic. Next, we will see how this syntax is being understood and processed in React. While compiling the code, our project workflow will have the transpilers like Babel, where it will be converted into standard JavaScript object using our React library. React library is having some predefined instruction on processing this JSX syntax. Here you can see how a JSX code is converted into a JavaScript object behind the scenes. Left side you can see our JSX code and right side is a processed and converted objects. You might not understand these codes right now. It's just to give you an idea. Let's see the implementation practically. Here I opened our React project and I already started our application and it's running in watch mode. So now I am going to open our component file which is app.js file. Here you can see the list of JSX code here which is rendering this content. To make it easier to understand, I am going to simplify this code by removing some of the content here, so that it will be easy for us to get it understand. Now I am just having a single line of code where we are going to display this h1 tag with this content as welcome to React app. Here you can see the changes reflected in our application. Now I am going to show you alternate way of rendering and creating these elements without using JSX. Let me comment this part. For that I am going to use the React object that we have already imported here. There we can find a predefined method called create element. This will take n number of arguments, but at least 3 arguments as minimum. The first argument will be the HTML element that we needs to render to the DOM. In our case, it is div element. It can be any HTML element or even a component we can render here. The next argument is an optional argument which is a configuration for this div, and it should be a JavaScript object. For now, let's keep it as null. The third argument is the n number of children that has to be nested under this element. In our case, the children is h1 tag. Under the h1 tag we have the content, which is the welcome to React app. Let's save the changes and see the output in our application. So this is the output we got as h1 welcome to React app. Let me inspect this output. Here you can see under div both are rendered as text. H1 is not rendered as an element. Let's fix this. So here this is a default behavior. The third argument that we are passing as children will be taken as a text. So in order to consider this as an element, we have to replace this code and create another element. Let's replicate the same way as we did for the root element. So here the element that we want to render is h1, and the configuration, let's keep it as null, and the children of h1 will be this content. Now let's save and see the output. Now rendered as we have expected. So div, under the div, h1 is rendered as an element, and in the h1 tag we have our content. So in this way also we can create HTML elements in React. Now you will think why you should go for this way and why I explained you. Just I want to clear on what's happening behind the scene. Whatever we have did in the same way React will do in the compilation phase. So our JSX code will be converted into a standard JavaScript object like this. This will be happening whenever our code is compiled in the compilation phase, and that's why we have seen in last lecture also we have to import this React library whenever you are using JSX, since behind the scene this JSX will be converted into this code. Now let's see how we can utilize this configuration that we have seen here. Let's have a JavaScript object here. I am going to apply class for this element. Let's save the changes and see whether this class has been applied to our element. Here you can see our class has been applied to our div element. So in this way we can have n number of configuration as JS object in this argument. Now you should have get some idea on how our JSX code is converted into a JavaScript object behind the scenes. Now let's jump back to our JSX code. I will comment this part and using this. In JSX we have some restriction. We will see what are those. Since we are using JSX in a JavaScript file itself, we can't use class as a keyword for defining a CSS class. In normal HTML element you can see the CSS class is defined like this, but here you can't use this since this class is already a reserved keyword of JavaScript. So we will use class name, but while compiling this code, this will be sent as class in the browser. I am saving this file. Here you can see that we have defined as class name here, but after compiling the code for browser it will be sent as class only, because browser can't understand this keyword as class name. So it will be taken care by React to convert this into a standard HTML format. And another restriction we have this, if I want to add another element, let's say h2 tag, so if I save this file, you can see an error like compilation error. So here you can see that JSX element must be wrapped in an enclosing tag, which means in JSX we can have only one root element and all the other elements should be wrapped into a root element only. We can't have the element outside that root element. So it should be inside this element. So if you save this, you can see it's rendering correctly. So JSX should have only one root element and all the other elements will be enclosed within this element. That's it guys. I hope you got some understanding on what is JSX and why we are using it in React. Also we have seen how React is converting it into standard JavaScript object behind the scenes. You will get much familiar with this JSX if you start to work on this. In our next video, we will jump into an important topic which is components in React, and we will see more about the components. Thank you for your valuable time. Please share with your friends, and if you have any questions or suggestions, please leave it in comments. And please subscribe to our channel to make your learning path easier. Thank you.